Imagine a land where the horizon never ends, where the sky touches the earth in a lonely embrace, and the wind carries only the sound of hooves and hunger. You're standing there, in the middle of the Mongolian steppe, endless grassland, cold as iron, wild as the heart of the man who was born to rule it. His name was Temujin, a boy with nothing but rage and will, born into betrayal and exile. When his father was poisoned by rivals, his family was cast out, left to starve. He grew up watching his mother dig for roots to feed her children, watching wolves tear at the weak, learning that mercy was a luxury that killed faster than the sword. Out of that silence and suffering rose a storm, and that storm would one day be called Genghis Khan. When Temujin became Genghis, he was no longer a man. He was an idea. He united the warring nomads of the Mongolian plains, tribes who once tore each other apart, forging them into a single, brutal machine of conquest. To the tribes, he offered order. To the world, he brought annihilation. The Mongol cavalry moved like ghosts, appearing out of nowhere and vanishing into dust, their arrows blotting out the sun. Kingdoms that had stood for centuries fell in days. Cities that once glittered with wealth burned until their ashes turned the sky black. Yet behind the roar of war, behind the conquest that reshaped the world, was a darker truth, one written not in steel, but in the bodies of women. In the culture of the steppes, marriage was never about love. It was about power, bloodlines, and control. Alliances were sealed with daughters, promises written in the names of wives. Women were not partners. They were vessels of diplomacy, rewards of loyalty, instruments of empire. Genghis Khan did not change that system. He perfected it. He did not marry for affection. He married to rule. He collected wives from every tribe, every enemy, every kingdom that fell beneath his hooves. The most beautiful, the most noble, the most valuable women were brought before him, trembling in silk or blood. He chose those with soft faces, small noses, round hips, red lips, and long hair that gleamed like black water. Those who pleased his eye became his wives or concubines. Those who did not were handed to his soldiers, to be used, then discarded. Once his lieutenants debated the greatest pleasure a man could have. Some said victory, others said wealth, others said the loyalty of strong men. But Genghis Khan laughed and answered, "The greatest joy is to crush your enemies, to drive them before you, to hear the cries of those they love, and to take into your arms their wives and daughters." That single line became the creed of an empire, the doctrine of a man who believed conquest was not complete until he had owned everything his enemy had loved. At the height of his reign, the Mongol Empire stretched from the coasts of China to the edge of Europe, from frozen Siberia to the sands of Arabia. Between 11 and 12 million square miles of land, more than any empire before or after. But his victories were measured not just in territory, but in the graves he left behind. Historians estimate that the wars of Genghis Khan killed around 40 million people, a slaughter so immense that it might have reduced the global population by nearly 11%. In China, cities vanished along with tens of millions of lives. In Persia, entire civilizations were erased. The rivers ran red, and even generations later, the soil in those lands was said to grow nothing but bones. Yet, while men were killed, women endured fates worse than death. For them, the arrival of the Mongols was not just the fall of a city, it was the end of choice. When the Mongol banners appeared over the horizon, every woman knew what was coming. Soldiers would storm through the streets, their blades cutting down anyone who resisted, and once the screams faded, the search began. The search for beauty. The youngest and fairest were gathered and brought to the Khan's camp. Their lives were decided by a glance, a nod, a single expression on the face of the conqueror who ruled the world. To be chosen meant survival, but survival was not freedom. It meant living as the possession of a man who believed himself chosen by heaven. Among these women, one name still echoes through history, Börte, the first and most beloved wife of Genghis Khan. She was born noble, wise, and strong. Their marriage was arranged when she was 10 and he was 9, and though it began as a tradition, she became the centre of his world. When raiders from the Merkit tribe attacked their camp, Börte was taken and given as a prize to another man. For 8 long months she lived in captivity, stripped of everything, until Genghis, still young and untested, gathered allies and rode through the night to rescue her. When he found her again, she carried a child, a boy named Yoki. Whispers spread like fire through the camp. Was the child hers and Genghis's, or the child of her captor? No one knew. Genghis never spoke of it. He simply looked at the boy and said, "He is my son." From that moment on, Börte's place was unshakable. She ruled beside him as Empress, mother of his empire, the only woman who could calm his fury. While he rode across Asia, burning kingdoms to ash, she governed Mongolia with sharp intelligence and steady hands. She was the breath of reason in a storm of blood. Yet she too had been taken. She too had been used as a symbol, a piece on a board she did not choose to stand on. Her strength was not in conquest but endurance, surviving the world her husband had built. Genghis Khan had at least 14 wives of high rank whose names we know, and countless others lost to history. Servants, concubines, slaves taken from burned villages. Only the sons born from Börte were considered legitimate heirs, the rest condemned to obscurity. But even in death, Genghis's legacy outlived every kingdom he crushed. Modern geneticists have found that nearly 16 million men alive today carry his Y chromosome, 1 in every 200 men on Earth. His empire fell apart, but his blood conquered time. Still beneath the myth, the shadow of his cruelty remains. Every empire has its cost, and his was paid in human lives. Cities turned to dust, families erased, and women whose names the world would never know. The chronicles remember the conqueror, but not the cries of those who watched their homes burn, their fathers die, their sisters dragged into tents as spoils of war. Imagine that. The fires outside your window, the thunder of hooves drawing closer, and the realization that the man riding toward you is not human anymore, but the will of the earth itself, come to claim everything you are. The Mongols called him the scourge of God, and perhaps he was, for he believed the world was his inheritance, that heaven had chosen him to cleanse it with death. And yet, in the stillness between wars, when the steppe was quiet and the stars hung low, maybe even Genghis Khan felt the weight of what he had done. Maybe he remembered the boy who starved in the snow, the woman he lost and found again, the faces of sons who would one day fight over his empire. Because in the end, no man escapes the ghosts he creates, not even the one who conquered the world. You can rule the earth, but you can never silence the echoes of what you've destroyed. The wars ended in silence. The cities burned, the kings bowed, the world bled into his name. But inside the quiet of his camp, where the scent of smoke mixed with silk and incense, another kind of empire began, one built not with swords, but with women. You see, the battlefield of Genghis Khan didn't end when the blood stopped flowing. It continued behind the felt walls of his great tent, in the glances, whispers, and tears of the women who called him husband. While the world feared his armies, his wives feared his silence. Because when Genghis Khan turned his gaze upon you, he didn't see a person. He saw a conquest, a bloodline, a tool of destiny. Each of his wives was more than a woman. She was a symbol, a living flag of the nations he had crushed. When he conquered a tribe, he didn't just take their land, he took their queen. To marry the Khan was to survive the destruction of your world. His wives were clothed in jewels, fed like royalty, attended by hundreds of servants, but they were captives wrapped in gold. Behind their silk curtains lay the most dangerous court on earth, a place where one wrong glance, one jealous word could end a life. In that tent, affection was politics and beauty was both blessing and curse. The hierarchy was absolute. At the top sat Börte, the great empress, his first wife, his oldest love, and the only one he ever truly trusted. Börte's tent stood apart from the rest. It was said that when she spoke, even generals lowered their heads. But her power was born of endurance, not affection. She had lived through humiliation and captivity. She had borne children whose very bloodlines were questioned. And yet she ruled with quiet strength, her eyes sharp as steel. While Genghis Khan expanded his empire, Börte held it together. She managed the domestic realm, resources, alliances, and the royal household, while he drowned the world in fire. And though he honoured her as empress, she was forced to watch him return from every campaign with new women, new brides, new trophies of war. Some of these women came willingly, others in chains. One was Yesugan, a noblewoman from a conquered tribe. When the Mongols took her people, she was brought before Genghis Khan. History tells that she charmed him with her grace and wit, and he spared her. But in an act that reveals the strange logic of his world, Yesugan pleaded for the life of her sister Yasui, saying, "If you have taken me, do not kill her. Take her too, for she is more beautiful than I." Genghis granted the request and took both sisters. Yasugan lived with the guilt of that decision for the rest of her days, and Yasui, who became one of his favourites, would bear the scars of her sister's sacrifice. Then there was Kulan, known for her beauty and wild spirit. She came from a desert tribe that resisted the Mongols until the last arrow fell. When Genghis took her captive, she refused to kneel. Her defiance intrigued him, and he made her one of his wives, but unlike others, Kulan rode beside him in battle, dressed in armour, her bow at her side. Some said he loved her because she reminded him of the life he'd lost, the freedom of the steppe, the days before empire. Others said he loved her because she was untamed. Yet, even her strength couldn't save her from the jealousy of the court. Börte tolerated no rival, and Kulan's independence made her dangerous. The chronicles go silent about her fate, but rumours whisper that she died mysteriously during a campaign, poisoned perhaps, or silenced by someone who saw her as a threat. There were others, countless others. Ibaka Beki, the daughter of a powerful Karit ruler, was given to Genghis Khan in alliance, but when the politics shifted he divorced her and handed her to one of his generals as a gift. It was an unthinkable humiliation for a noble woman, a reminder that even queens were pawns in his game, and yet this was the pattern of his reign. He used women as bridges between clans, symbols of unity, but never as equals. His tent was a map of his empire, every wife representing a conquered people, every child a proof of dominance. But beneath this structure of power, darkness festered. There were whispers of jealousy so fierce that women vanished overnight, concubines found dead, their faces pale and untouched, their names struck from the record. Some said Börte herself ordered it, others said Genghis did to maintain order among his wives. The Mongol court had no room for sentiment. Love was a weakness, and betrayal a death sentence. And there was betrayal, not always of the body but of the heart. One story, buried in legend, tells of a captured princess from the Tangut dynasty. She was brought to Genghis's tent after her people surrendered. He demanded her submission, but she refused. Night after night she endured his fury in silence. Then one evening, when he least expected, she struck. A hidden blade, a wound that festered. Some claim that wound was the true cause of his death. Whether that story is true or not, it lingers because it feels like justice. A whisper from the dead saying, even the greatest conqueror can bleed. The scandals didn't end with his death. After Genghis was gone, his wives became ghosts in history. Börte ruled the homeland for a time, protecting her sons and securing the succession, but the others were less fortunate. Some were forced to marry his generals or his sons, others vanished without trace. Their lives were erased, their graves forgotten. The empire that had been built on their bodies now discarded them as though they were relics of war. Even in death, Genghis's wives were silenced. No monuments, no songs, just empty names swallowed by the steppe. And yet, through them, his bloodline spread. 16 million men alive today carry his genetic signature, a mark passed down through centuries, through both love and violence. Every child born from those women, whether empress or captive, became part of that lineage. It is the most chilling legacy imaginable, the conqueror's blood running quietly through millions who will never know it. That is how his empire survived. Not in stone, not in power, but in flesh. But that legacy came with a curse. His obsession with purity of blood created endless feuds among his descendants. Only Börte's sons were recognized as legitimate heirs, Yochi, Chagatai, Ogedei, and Tolui, and even among them, doubt lingered. The question of Yochi's paternity haunted the family like a ghost. Chagatai refused to accept him, calling him the son of Börte's captor. Genghis silenced them both, but the rift never healed. After his death, that doubt tore his empire apart. Brothers turned against each other, each claiming the true right to their father's throne. In the end, the same blood that united the tribes would destroy them. When you peel back the myth of Genghis Khan, you find not just the story of war, but the story of possession, of a man who believed everything could be owned, even love. His wives were trophies of his victories, symbols of his control over life itself, but love cannot be conquered. It obeys no sword, no empire, no name. Perhaps that's why he feared it, why he chose dominance over devotion, control over compassion. For all his power, he never understood that to truly rule, one must be loved. He ruled through terror, and terror dies with its master. The empire that once spanned the earth crumbled, the banners fell, and the world moved on. But the women, the ones history forgot, remained buried beneath it all. Their stories exist only in fragments, their voices lost to dust, and yet in those fragments you can feel the pulse of something eternal, the truth that even the mightiest man is nothing without the women who bore his name, his heirs, his sins. So when the wind howls across the Mongolian plains, carrying the ghost of a name once feared across continents, remember this. Genghis Khan may have ruled the world, but within his tent he ruled a kingdom of silence, built upon the suffering of women who could never tell their stories, and perhaps, somewhere beneath that endless sky, their whispers still ride the wind, the quiet voices of queens who once defied the conqueror of the world. He conquered the earth, but never himself. If you crave the dark truths of history, subscribe. Because the past isn't dead, it's buried beneath the dust waiting to be heard.